For the love of games!
Hey there everybody, how's it going? This is Steven from PxA and welcome to our ArcheAge First Impressions series where we're going to be taking a look at the latest MMO from Korean studio XL Games brought westward to us by Trion Worlds. These videos are going to take a look at ArcheAge and basically give you my thoughts while I'm playing the game. This specific video is going to deal with my impressions between levels 1 and 10. So ArcheAge is a free-to-play fantasy MMORPG with more than a few scoops taken from the sandbox style of games. The game has a big emphasis on freedom in both who you are as a character and what you can do in the world. You can run trade routes, craft awesome weapons, run a farm, build a ship, sail that ship, and way more. But before we can get started, let's get the all-important character creation over and done with. The options here are actually pretty robust. You don't have any control over your physical features of your body, but the facial features you can adjust are, as far as most MMOs go, pretty in depth. You have a set list of preset faces which you can choose or build off of, and then most of the basic options we're all familiar with. From there you can adjust hairstyles, choose from a list of preset facial features to customize the look of your eyes, mouth, and nose, and so on. One thing I did enjoy was a positional slider for imperfections like scars or burns on your face, allowing you to place them just right. You can also resize or rotate them. Once you're done setting the basics down for your character though, there's also a group of sliders which control the size and shape of your entire head. Overall, character appearance is pretty solid. The only thing I really noticed was that for whatever reason, the character skin tone seemed way off from what they appear within the actual game. Being a pretty pale dude, I went for the lightest skin tone and I didn't see much of a difference. In game, however, it was much more apparent, so be careful with what you choose. The hair is the only other thing that really bugs me. It's kinda ugly. The actual styles themselves are fine, but the hair has an almost crystalline shine about it that I found a little gross and made many of the hair colors look kinda cheap. Not to mention it also suffers from that, hey look, turns out I'm 20 shades brighter in-game problem. Once you've picked how you want to look, it's time to pick how you want to fight. ArcheAge has a really interesting class system. Most MMOs have you choose a single class for your character and then maybe have a few different paths for that class to progress along, like in vanilla WoW with its skill trees. ArcheAge has you create a hybrid using 3 different classes and their respective skills. There are no limitations to what you can choose, and there is a great amount of freedom and experimentation in this system. At level 5 and 10, you will unlock your second and third class, which will give you a new class name based on that combination thereof. ArcheAge has effectively over 120 different class combinations, which is really interesting. What is even cooler is that after unlocking all of your classes, you are free to swap them for new ones for a small fee. You're encouraged to experiment with different combos, and if you ever decide you want to go back to using a previous skill tree, have no fear, the progress you have put into it is saved for you. So after reaching level 10, what are my thoughts so far? Well, with MMOs, it's kind of a difficult question, because for whatever reason, MMOs have this weird design philosophy that requires you to pay your dues before you can do anything truly fun or exciting. It's kind of backwards to approach creating a game like that, but you see it time and time again. The actual game is locked away behind level restrictions, and ArcheAge is sadly no different. The game is so wholly mundane in my first 10 levels that I think if I hadn't already read about what was to come and was looking forward to it, I probably would have uninstalled the game and walked away, believing that this was nothing special. It's just another Korean MMO. Don't get me wrong, ArcheAge functions reasonably well. The graphics are actually quite pretty, even if the landscapes are kind of uninteresting, wide open areas with little flavor or detail. The character models are nice and the animation is really good, but sometimes it suffers because the game seems to feel kinda jerky. There are some impressive effects on display, though their impact is lessened somewhat by the bland world around you, but textures are nice and high res, and I actually enjoy the depth of field effects on distant terrain features like mountains, and the world looks fairly pleasant. It sounds pleasant too, even if the musical score took me a while to get used to. There is almost no voice acting in the game aside from the story-driven cutscenes which you'll run into quite frequently early on.
Harani never fight a battle they cannot win. Even centuries ago, during the war between gods and heroes, the other races were destroyed.
What voice acting I did discover was Korean, and even that was few and far between. One thing I really enjoy about ArcheAge is this fairly high amount of interactivity. Coming from Final Fantasy XIV, where the environments were largely static and your interaction with them was usually represented by a single generic gesture and a glowing orb that somehow represented whatever object you were using, ArcheAge has a surprising amount of animations and things to do. You can ride passenger on other people's mounts, pick up potions for status buffs, or destroy various objects in the world. There are characters to talk to and things to see and touch. While the surrounding landscape might feel a little uninspired, the towns themselves actually feel rather immersive, full of players and NPCs going about their business in a way that doesn't totally shatter the illusion. In terms of actual gameplay, you're going to be doing the same thing you've done in every MMO up until now. If you're playing ArcheAge hoping for a totally unique experience, you're going to be sorely let down. ArcheAge seems to be a game where the emphasis is on fleshing out and polishing systems that have existed in MMOs for decades now, rather than break entirely new ground. Combat, for instance, is your typical tab targeting hotkey mashing affair. There's a combo system which rewards you for stringing specific moves together, but at level 10 its implementation was almost entirely cursory and really only provided the benefit of doing marginal extra damage or stunning a foe for a second or two. One thing I appreciated was that every class seemed to have a bow which they could use to pull enemies at range. Another interesting addition is a musical instrument which you can use to provide yourself with temporary buffs or healing, which is also available regardless of class. One of the most distinguishable mechanics in ArcheAge is actually one of the most polarizing, and that's the labor point system. And it's here that ArcheAge really flies its free-to-play colors. Everything you do in ArcheAge that isn't related to questing or combat is usually tied to the labor point system. Labor points are a currency that you acquire passively at a rate of 5 per 5 minutes of time spent in the game if you're a free-to-play player, or 10 for 5 minutes in the game and 5 if you're not logged in at all if you're a patron player. Identifying objects, gathering, crafting, building, all of this requires labor points. But by level 10, I haven't really experienced much of anything that requires any labor point spending. I gathered a few herbs and identified some equipment, but nothing that really made a dent in my labor point income. Since I opted to pay the monthly fee and become a patron, I would assume that the idea is that paid members would accrue them at a rate that doesn't punish overplaying the game. But I can't say for sure at this stage. The system seems odd at best and a poor way of regulating the free-to-play community. Even before I played for myself, I was able to identify a whole host of issues that make this seem like a bad idea, and after playing the game, I've realized that much of my guesses were bang on. So if ArcheAge seems so wholly unwilling to break new ground, why would anyone play it? It's a good question, and one that I'm struggling to answer now, even with the knowledge of the potentially awesome systems that will come into play down the road. But with MMOs, for me, the devil is always in the details, and it's here that I can see some interesting things that hopefully get expanded on later in the game. I've spent more time playing MMOs than I will ever be willing to admit in polite company, and there seems to me some potentially great things that will help me forgive just how typical ArcheAge feels. The first of those is mounts. ArcheAge is fond of chucking new movement options at you fairly early on. I was only around level 6 when I received my first racial mount. But while getting a mount early on isn't cause enough to throw a party and declare this game of the year, what I find telling is just how the mount system seems to be implemented. Plenty of games use mounts as a go faster button, with the added bonus of watching yourself move faster with some awesome creature between your thighs. But it's an illusion designed to either create a desire to spend time or money collecting these mounts. They act as gold sinks and progress gates, and in reality what they accomplish is barely anything beyond moving just a little bit faster. But in ArcheAge, mounts feel much more special. They aren't just creatures that magically appear between your legs, and then when you're done with them, they just disappear until you need them again, like Pokemon existing in some weird other world where they need no food or tending. In ArcheAge, mounts have a physical presence. When you summon one, you don't even immediately start riding it. It appears next to you and follows you through the world. Even more interesting is that these mounts have levels, equipment slots, and abilities you can unlock. Couple this with what I said earlier about being able to ride shotgun on another person's mount, and I definitely see some potential for a lot of interesting systems and gameplay surrounding your relationship with your mount. The other thing that is really telling to me that ArcheAge seems to do really well is something that I already touched on: interactivity. A lot of MMOs lack immersion because they do so little to mask the fact that your avatar is nothing more than an automaton. He isn't an extension of your presence in the world, but he's a cage denying you the freedom to move and interact in a way that is convincing. While ArcheAge isn't revolutionary by any means, I've noticed that there is a distinct amount of attention paid to how you interact and move in the world. Your character doesn't just appear on his mount, he grabs the reins and flips himself on. In one quest, I had to cross a castle moat by shimmying across a rope tied to a tree, which I have to think will have some sort of use later on in the game, maybe allowing players to scale castle walls in PvP or make their way across otherwise impassable chasms. But it's these little morsels of potential that are even bigger when you get your first taste of the open seas in a rather unimpressive rowboat. You earn it in a quest in the later half of your journey to level 10, which will allow you to paddle your way across open bodies of water or even small rivers. ArcheAge has a big emphasis on sailing, which is apparent from the promotional materials for the game, and while I wish my first foray into the open seas was made with a bang and not a whisper, having even a small, slow-moving taste of that freedom was actually really exciting. That degree of control, watching my character row differently depending on whether he is turning or not, seeing all of the attention to detail packed into those systems is really intriguing. ArcheAge is one of the few MMOs that I've played in a long while that has a real sense of place. You aren't just some avatar able to dart around the world in the blink of an eye. Getting places takes time, energy, and thought. So many MMOs make the mistake of replacing immersion with convenience, doing everything they can to minimize the effort required to complete a task. Want to go to a city? Why not just teleport there instantly? You feel like a person in a big, wide open world, and there are other people in that world with you, because there's actually things to do in the world. This isn't a game where you're going to spend your hours waiting in PvP queues or running the same dungeons over and over and over again. You're going to get out there and experience things. At this point, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the technical issues apparent in the game. While ArcheAge runs reasonably well on my system, it is evident that this game is not a masterpiece of programming. For the most part, I was able to keep a steady 60 frames per second, although slightly lower in busier areas, but that also came with a host of frame dips and jerky motion and all sorts of weirdness. Toss in the fact that the game seems to have more memory leaks than a Dutch dike, and you can have a rather unpleasant experience. There are fixes out there for most of these problems, which I won't touch on, but just know that your ride in ArcheAge is going to likely be a bumpy one. I even spent a good 45 minutes last night searching online to find a solution to a problem which stopped the game from even launching, and was making my hard drive sound like it was having an aneurysm. This is all even if you're lucky enough to get past the massive queues that have clogged almost every single server, but hopefully all of that will go away. At the end of the day, ArcheAge has my curiosity, but it doesn't quite have my attention. Like any MMO, I'll expect it'll take another 20 hours before I can fully grasp some of the systems in the game. I haven't even been able to touch on crafting, gathering, farming, owning a house, building a boat, being a pirate, all of the systems in the game, because I'm not at a place where the game has deemed my few hours required to hit level 10 worthy enough of such pursuits. But as unremarkable of a start as ArcheAge has, there isn't really a whole lot to complain about. The game works, it functions well, it looks rather pretty, it just kind of feels a bit run-of-the-mill. I'm gonna keep playing ArcheAge, and I wanna keep playing ArcheAge. It seems like there's some really cool systems there. Yesterday I was down by a beach and I saw a player summon a schooner out of a portal. It was awesome, and then I jumped on board with him and we went sailing together. ArcheAge feels like the type of game that'll just have these awesome, wondrous immersion experiences, adventures that you go on, and I want to experience some of that. It's just a shame that the game decided to hide so much of that awesomeness behind level gating. So that's all I really have to say about ArcheAge, and I hope what I did have to say was rather illuminating. If you've played the game and you feel differently or have any insights you want to give me, do so in the comments. I want to hear from people who've played farther into this game than I have. But that's all we really have time for today, so thank you for taking the time to watch this. Be sure to check out pixelattack.net for more videos, reviews, news, just general gaming sexiness that we all know and love. And I will see you guys next time when we examine my thoughts on levels 10 to 20.